There is a disease that, as far as I know, according to Wikipedia, I think about 300,000 people a year get diagnosed with, and the median person dies within about 12 months of getting that diagnosis, even with treatment. And Ben Woodington here is trying to create a cure for that disease using some very interesting neurotechnology. Ben, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it, man.
Pleasure to be here.
Try to get a little bit closer to the mic, like, a little bit
all right.
like that. Yeah. You can kind
Better,
of lean into
better.
it. That's
See
much
my
better.
levels?
Yeah. I got to get in there.
All right.
Ben, so you are the co-founder and CEO of Coherence Neuro.
Correct, yeah.
Brand new, rebranded to Coherence. I won't bother mentioning the previous name because we don't want to distract anyone, but...
Always think forward. We're
That's
only
right.
Coherence.
Only looking forward. You guys are running a neurotechnology company, a invasive neurotech company. Some people might use the term BCI to describe what you guys are doing. Again, perpetually teasing what you guys are actually doing. What does BCI mean to you?
BCI is a very big catch-all.
It's a big catch-all.
It's a big catch-all. BCI means to me any technology that interacts with the brain bidirectionally, even closer.
Even closer.
Bidirectionally, typically. So I think about...
So what is bidirectionally mean?
I think about BCIs as technologies that can sense some activity from within the body and technologies that can actuate or have some biological effect within the body using some sensing paradigm, some stimulation paradigm. Now, I don't think that has to be implantable. That can be non-invasive. That can be invasive. That can be many modalities from focused ultrasound to direct electrical contact and everything else in between. For us, what a BCI means is a technology that can understand something from within the body, in our case, disease, rather than some motor output, and can actuate, modify disease within the body.
Gotcha. So yeah, to use the sort of like computer science parlance, bidirectional could just mean read/write, and read could be anything from the very sci-fi, like reading minds, bit to more practical reading, motor control, reading,
Sensory
anything
function,
really, any sort of sense. Yeah.
Or just the oscillations and rhythms.
Right. Reading something that
from within the brain.
the person whose brain it is may not even consciously be aware of that's
Absolutely.
happening. Right? Just something very, very subtle, but that is still meaningful in some context. And the vast majority of the BCIs that the average person are aware of are things like Neuralink, which are generally, as far as I'm aware, are mostly being used to read like motor control thoughts so that someone that's paralyzed can move a wheelchair or keyboard around. And then many people might also be familiar with things like TMS, which are stimulating various parts of the brain for psychiatric purposes, trying to treat depression or something. But you guys have a very different indication or disease area that you're trying to address. Tell me about that, and why is it important, and why aren't there more BCI companies going after what you're going after, given how important it is?
Yeah, big questions.
Hey everyone, pardon the interruption. I just want to let you know that this podcast is an effort of Exia, a venture capital fund Sam and I run that invests in what we call Human 3, the next epic of health, well-being, and performance. We invest in frontier areas like genetic medicine, brain-computer interfaces, longevity, and even psychedelics. So if you're a founder building on the periphery of biotech or an investor who wants to get involved, please reach out to us at hello@exiavp.com. That's hello@xeiavp.com. All right, back to the show. Big question.
To kick off.
Yeah, big
I'll
questions.
start with an easy one. Yeah. So to zoom out again, right? So we develop technologies, we build technologies that can modify disease. They're implantable therapeutic neurotechnologies that can modify but also understand diseases electrically. And you're right, we think that the largest impact we can have with those technologies is actually in cancer, not in other disease areas. So, the ability to electrically modify cancers, the ability to electrically and digitally understand the progression of cancers, we think that can just be such an incredibly high impact area of engineering, of clinical science.
And specifically brain cancers.
I mean,
at least for starting.
For starters, for 10 is in brain cancer. So our leading product, our first product to go to market will be Soma. It's a brain-based neural interface that we are using to treat and track brain cancer, like glioblastoma that you mentioned in the podcast. So you're right. You can consider this a BCI for brain cancer, a device that can electrically modulate disease, but can also record and understand how that disease progresses. Now, why are we going after glioblastoma? Was your other question?
Yes.
Glioblastoma, as you mentioned, is a horrific disease. Every single person that is diagnosed with glioblastoma today will die. And
the stat that I saw was average person dies within 12 months, even with standard of care treatment.
Yep.
If you're not treated, die in 3 months.
Yep.
And I think it was only 5% of people make it to 5 years.
Yep.
So pretty serious. It's a death sentence, basically.
It's a death sentence. And more harrowing than that, the standard of care has not evolved in that disease in 25 years.
And why is that? Because I one of the things that I do appreciate about modern medicine is that it has made a lot of progress in cancer generally. Like on average, it's much better to get cancer today than it was like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But it seems like for this specific type of cancer, not much has been done, and it's still pretty much guaranteed early death.
Yeah.
And why is that the case? Is it just because it's in the brain and it's hard to get in the brain? Like what's your story for that?
There's a few reasons for this. One of the reasons is surgically. It is just so early detection has got better across the board in cancers, but surgically in the brain we're just as far behind as we were, pretty much 25, 30 years ago, because I can't just remove your brain. Right? If someone has breast cancer, like I can remove the breast. If I have testicular cancer, you can remove the testicle. In the brain, like I can only remove so much of your brain before I have to stop, right? And this is called like a maximally safe resection where 70 to 80% of patients, they will go in, they will surgically take out as much of that tumor, as much of the cancer as possible. And the other problem is, most of the progress that has been made in cancer over the last couple of decades is immunotherapy. And immunotherapies just are not that effective in the brain.
Because it's hard to deliver them there, or why?
Because it's hard to deliver them there, but they're also sort of like immune cold tumors. Like they're just it's the immune system in the brain is very different to the rest of the body, and so the drugs don't get there. And if they do get there, they just don't have a large immune response like they do elsewhere. This is a problem. It calls for radical new approaches, and there are multiple people trying to take very radical approaches to this disease.
Fair enough. You guys being one of them.
Us being one of them, yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like I think this idea of electrostimulation, just stepping back a little bit, for treating any type of cancer, not even glioblastoma, is probably relatively novel to most people listening. Like usually if someone hears a treatment for cancer, they imagine 1, maybe cutting out the tumor surgically, 2, some sort of chemotherapy, which is, some sort of radiation treatment, basically a drug, some type of drug.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's really like common to think of we're going to zap the tumor with electricity, to put it very crudely, and that's going to solve the problem. So what's the history of electronic medicine, maybe to use that term, for treating different types of cancer? Is this something that is common in other areas of cancer outside the brain, or is it still relatively novel no matter what type of cancer we're talking about?
Yeah, so you're right. The way we have tackled cancer in the past is, as one of our surgeons put it, is we cut it, we burn it, we poison it. We chop it out. We use radiotherapy.
It's very barbaric.
It's very barbaric. It's dated, but it kind of works, right? And like now we're thinking about new approaches. One of these approaches is electrically modifying the disease. Now, there is, the most important element of this to understand is these cancer. What we're discovering is tissues within our body. Many of them are electrically active. So, everybody understands that like nerves within the body is electrically active, or brain cells are electrically active. But what we're finding out is cells throughout the body, including tumor cells and cancer cells, are electrically active as well. And that means 3 very exciting things. It means that you can directly modify the cancer cell behavior either electrostatically or directly, electronically. You can modify the supporting architecture of the cell, so the vascular structures or the neural structures themselves that are fueling that cancer electrically. And you can also modify the immune system as well. So you can upregulate immunity, again, electronically. Now, the second part of this question, you asked me, has anyone done this before, right? The answer is this is early. So there's a lot of research behind this, both in sort of the neuromodulation space and electrostatic actuation of cancer in space. Really, though, there's only one company that is out there at the moment that has had a success in doing this, actually in glioblastoma as well. So this is a company called Novocure. It's a big, hefty wearable system that you have to shave your head for, slap pads all over your head. You have to wear a backpack with a huge battery in it to deliver the field because it doesn't go through the skull very well. But it's been pretty successful. I mean,
and this is for glioblastoma.
This is for glioblastoma,
right? And it's not a surgical implant. It's just a like a surface electrode array or something like that.
Exactly. So it's not invasive or implanted, but it's very intrusive.
Patients carrying around the backpack, you have to wear a swim cap basically all day and shave your head.
Precisely.
Sure.
From
what I understand, they're making quite a bit of money.
They're making a lot of money,
even though it is quite, as you said, intrusive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that company made 600 million last year in revenue, and I think what that shows is just the demand that those patients have. Those patients are desperate for the next thing, the next technology, the next opportunity, the next bit of hope.
And do you know to what extent that treatment extends the expected life?
Yeah, so the sort of real world data shows that if a patient is using it on like kind of average use, it's because there's a usage effect.
Right.
And if they're
Not everyone's going to use it 24/7.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a usage effect. So if you use it for sort of 16 to 18 hours a day, you're getting like 2 to 4 months of life extension.
I mean, it's big when the baseline is 3 months.
Which is big when the baseline is so low.
But it's still depressing.
But if you use it continuously, so if you're a super user and use it like 95% of the day when you're sleeping, everything, you're getting like a 9-month benefit to life, which again is bigger. It's bigger than any drug we've seen certainly in the last few decades. Yeah. So it's pretty big. It's not good enough though.
Yeah, and you guys are obviously trying to improve on that for glioblastoma, but in the broader sense, outside of glioblastoma in the brain, are there other companies that are working on let's treat some type of breast cancer, some other pancreatic cancer, who knows, right, with some type of electrical stimulation, or is it still pretty frontier no matter what part of the body we're talking about?
It's still pretty frontier. Yeah. This same company is also looking at mesothelioma. They're looking at pancreatic cancer as well. But actually, it's something that we're also looking at. So we're actually looking at maybe not just brain-computer interfaces, but biological computer interfaces or disease computer interfaces. So we're looking at how we can apply the same technology stack to pancreatic cancers or to lung cancers or to breast cancers, where we can again like electrically modify that disease, but also record the electrical cues of that disease and how it's progressing, understanding how it's evolving in real time. So we now have studies running in multiple areas.
All right. So let's talk about, I know we've been talking very like high level and broadly. Let's talk specifically about the Soma device and how it actually works and what the tactics of like actually getting it into a patient are. And then we'll talk about, your background in the company and everything. But so step one, I assume, is the patient gets diagnosed with glioblastoma. Yep. Step two, and you take it from there. Where do we go from there?
So patient journey is really as follows. One is diagnosed with a brain. Usually they present with some seizure or an excruciating headache. They will go to A&E usually, or ER here.
Yeah. What was it called?
A&E, accident and emergency in the UK. They will have a scan, and the scan will show a mass in the brain. The clinical team will rightly be quite worried about this, and after some investigation, it will show that you have what's called a glioblastoma or a high-grade brain tumor. And the outcome of this is pretty poor. Now, after that, you have a surgery as quick as possible. The primary mode of fighting that tumor is to chop out as much of it as you can, and then you carry out what's called the Stupp protocol. So you cut it out.
Stupp protocol?
Stupp, named after Roger Stupp. You cut it out, you deliver radiotherapy, you deliver a chemo drug called temozolomide. Really after that, the patient is in sort of clinical trial territory. There are other opportunities like this Novocure technology, but really you're pretty
And so sorry to cut you off, but just to be clear, like, is the concern that it's basically impossible for the surgeon to know that they've removed all of the cancer cells, and so there's going to be regrowth? Is that why
exactly
it doesn't just end after the surgery?
Exactly. Okay. So, you can't think of a brain tumor as a perfectly formed solid mass like an egg in the brain. Right. You think of it more like sort of tentacles within the brain, spreading, perfusing, diffusing into the brain tissue itself. So when you remove the most of the mass, you're going to have residual cells left. And
there's just no way to possibly get them all.
It's just no,
especially without probably damaging good parts of the brain,
precisely.
Which you probably want.
And you want to preserve that for quality of life for the patient. You don't want to damage speech. You don't want to damage motor areas of the brain, because you want that patient to have like the best quality of life they possibly can going forward. And so, the next therapeutic approaches is like, okay, well, how do you then target the rest of it? How do you target everything else? Or how do you target tumors that can't be resected because they're too deep in the brain, for example, where you just would never go in for resection? And that's where this like new brand of technologies can help considerably.
So once the device, speaking specifically to Soma and your device, after, or is it during the surgery where the device is implanted in the same surgical procedure, or is it a separate surgery? Okay.
So one of the biggest problems, I think, with neurotechnologies and BCI generally, certainly implantable devices, is that surgical and commercial uptake, right? Like, how do we justify surgery? Surgery is expensive,
it is.
And it carries some inherent risk, right? It doesn't matter. You can make devices super, super tiny, as we have. Yeah. There's always some tiny amount of risk.
Still have to shove it into your brain somehow.
Still got to get it. You still got to get it under the skin. Still got to get it in the skull, right? Now, in our use case, certainly for our first use case, almost all of those patients are having surgery, and we will go in during that surgery. So patient is having a resection or a biopsy, and we'll go in and implant at that point.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, not really funny, but like we've invested in 5 different implantable BCI, brain computer interface companies at this point. And in one respect, your guys' device is the most invasive because it actually is being implanted like in the brain. But on the other hand, it's actually the least invasive because it's happening during a surgery the person's already getting. Like they're not going under and just having another surgery just for the sake of this.
Yeah.
So I think of it as incredibly non-invasive, just given that they're already going under the knife. And so the device, what is it, like the size of how big are we talking here?
Yeah, like fingernail.
Fingernail?
Yeah, it's 13 millimeters in diameter, 13.5 millimeters in diameter, so it can sit in a standard burr hole procedure.
And it gets dropped off basically where the tumor was?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
And then what does it do?
So as soon as it's delivered, we can then switch on our therapeutic stimulation. So we can start delivering an electrical current, electrical stimulus to the local tissue. But we're also, again, this is still a BCI, a biological computer interface. We're also recording at that point as well. So from the moment the patient has that device, we want to, we switch on a therapeutic protocol, and then through the rest of that patient's life, we're also recording to understand how is that disease progressing. Is it transforming? Is it growing? Is it accelerating? Or is it being treated?
And so the idea is that this device can do both the reading and the writing, to use that terminology. And if it detects regrowth in a certain area, it can direct the stimulation towards that area. It can maybe crank up the stimulation or tone it down, or I don't know if it can directionally target it to a specific area, but basically just try to kill any attempts that the tumor has at regrowing.
Absolutely. All of that is true, but also, we also think about how these feed into the wider healthcare systems as well, and how invaluable that data will be. Right? At the moment, if you're diagnosed with, one of these awful tumors, you're maybe getting an MRI every 3 months, every 6 months. Like, we really don't know what's going on in between those time points, and being able to constantly understand what is going on at the site allows us to optimize peripheral treatment as well. So maybe you can go in and re-resect the bit that you missed, chop it out. Maybe you can hit the patient with new radiotherapy. Maybe you can change drugs if there's a new drug on the market. And we also think about how that data will eventually feed into the wider healthcare infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to imagine, I think I saw that it's the average person that gets diagnosed with glioblastoma is in their 60s. Yeah, so they're kind of around the age that they might be getting, early Alzheimer's symptoms and that sort of thing. Maybe you could even detect things that have nothing to do with the cancer, but that people in that age category are starting to become at risk for.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. And so how does it, is there a wireless power component? And just to get into kind of the technical details, obviously you're not putting a battery in the head probably, right? So
no. So one of the biggest design challenges our team have had to overcome is actually on MRI. So MRI is crucial in a lot of neuromedicine, neurological medicine. But in cancer, it is indispensable, right? Every patient is having an MRI. It is the gold standard imaging technique. And so we need to strip magnets out of that device. We need to
Right,
strip.
because if there's any magnet, it'll rip through the brain onto the side of the machine,
Well,
right? Pretty much.
Yes, that is true if you design the device poorly.
Right. Well, that's if there's any magnetic material in there,
Yeah.
So you have to make sure it's MRI compatible.
We have to make sure it's MRI compatible, but we also have to make sure that we don't affect the image quality. So,
interesting.
in a cochlear implant, for example, it has a big magnet in there, but they can take that magnet out, right? They can go in for another surgery. It's not ideal, but you can go in for another surgery. You can take the magnet out. But even with the magnet out, just the battery and the amount of metal titanium that's in there, you end up casting like warping shadows over the MRI.
Really? Interesting.
And that's
I didn't know that. That's
it's an absolute no-go for us.
Wow.
And by the way, that's going to be a problem for a lot of BCI companies as well, right? Like if you're MRI compliant, that's fine. But if you're casting warping shadows over the brain, right? The let's say MRI risk from about 65 years up is about 10% per year, right? Your chances of having an MRI.
Right. This is actually like a big thing I'm learning. I thought it was just as simple as we need to make sure that it's not going to get ripped out, with the magnets and the MRI. But now there's this whole other concern.
Yeah,
very interesting.
Yeah, and we want that gold standard to exist alongside our implant, not just for ourselves. Like we can train data alongside MRI data, but also for if a patient has a stroke, right? We want that patient to be able to have the best medical care they possibly can, and our technology to sit right alongside that, not get in the way.
Right, that makes sense. How did you become a guy running a company doing this? What a crazy thing to be doing. I mean, what was the story that got you here?
A winding path. I originally studied chemistry and actually drug development is what I was working on. I went from drug development into drug delivery. So I was working for a couple of different companies that were looking at drug delivery devices. Actually, what I discovered working for those drug delivery devices is quite how bad patient compliance is. Even when these are drugs that are saving patients' lives, people don't take them, or they take them poorly, or they take them at the wrong time, or they take them incorrectly. And that was that's a huge issue. And actually, it's one of the reasons I sort of fell in love with the implant space is like, there's no compliance issues, right?
It's in.
You control how that patient receives their dosing, and you get all the usage statistics of that, right? So I was there for a while.
Why do you think people don't take their drugs?
Because people are sometimes irrational, and we don't act in their best interests. They get swept up with other things, and I think there's a bias to believing that you'll get better.
Stubborn.
People are stubborn. Yeah. People are stubborn, right? Anyway, so I worked in drug delivery for a while. Really got into the engineering side of things, more on the sort of biomedical engineering side of the company. Now, I had no formal training in biomedical engineering at that point. I was just figuring it out on the job, working with really interesting, talented engineers to build these devices and characterize these devices. After a while, for many reasons, I decided to leave that company. The company was pretty successful, but I decided that I wanted to take on new challenges, and I decided really, there was a fork in my road, in the road.
Your road.
Or yes. my particular road. Where did I want to focus my efforts next? And for me, neurotech was just such an exciting avenue. This was about 8 years ago. Neuralink was just getting off the ground. Synchron had maybe just done their sort of first human, or just done their first in human. And I thought, this seems like a radical area of medicine. This is going to be so impactful. I want to do this. So I went, I did a master's at University of Cambridge looking at sensor technologies and BCI. And then I did my PhD there under the supervision of George Meliaris and Damiano Barone, talented engineers and neurosurgeons, where I was developing minimally invasive neural interfaces for the brain and spinal cord. Met my co-founder along the way, Elise Jenkins. She was applying these neurotechnology devices to cancer. So she was working in neuro-oncology. And again, I was just presented with this field, this cancer neuroscience field that I had never seen before. And it just took me away. I was like, why is no one doing this? This is so fascinating. There's so much opportunity here, both on the diagnostic side and on the therapeutic side. This is a no-brainer. We have to build here. This makes sense. That's how I did it.
And then when did you start the company?
We started the company in 2022.
All right.
We, kicked it off in sort of summer of 2022, just at the end of our PhDs.
Yeah.
We raised our first round during our PhDs, closed it literally as we were submitting, and then we've been going since then now.
And then based in the UK, but potentially spanning out into the US.
Yeah, we're split now between San Francisco, sort of Bay Area, and Cambridge. So we have a team here, we have a team there. Cambridge is very much focused on preclinical test systems and data, and a little bit of clinical work. And the US side is really focused on product and preclinical sort of rodent modeling as well for our diseases.
Yeah. Now, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned that 8 years ago you kind of got exposed to this neurotech space, and I was aware of the fact that neurotech kind of existed as a field back then, even though I wasn't doing any early stage investing, but it still, I think, was very under the radar. Like, I think even back then, the average person, even someone who maybe owned a Tesla, didn't know that Neuralink existed, right? Even though it's like an Elon sort of affiliated company. But now, and maybe it's just because we're doing a lot of investing in this space, it seems to me that there's an incredible amount of like hype and momentum. And I am almost starting to wonder if it's like too much hype around it. The reason that I get the feeling that there might be is because I'm starting to see an increasingly amount of really shitty neurotech pitches. And there's sort of this parallel to what happened in the psychedelic drug development space, which I've also invested heavily in, where kind of earlier on you would see very infrequent proposals for companies, but they were generally quite high quality because this was not a hyped area to be working in, right? But then, like, as the years went on and 2022, 2023-ish, there started to be just a lot of absurd pitches from people that had no qualifications to be doing this kind of thing. And I'm starting to see more and more of that in the neurotech space. So, I mean, what do you think? Do you think that, like, maybe because of the Neuralink's at least success in raising capital, I don't know about their actual operational success, but is it because of headlines like that there's a lot of hype, or do you think that this is still like inning one and we have a long way to go?
Yeah, I think like obviously Neuralink brought a lot of attention to the space, right? And then through the investments of not just Elon Musk, but like Jeff Bezos's family office and Gates' family office, like a lot of this money has now gone towards neurotech companies as well. And first things first, I would say like that's only a good thing. Like I'm incredibly bullish on the field and the impact that it's going to have. Does that mean that you get a side effect of like it gets a bit frothy and some questionable things start coming through? Yes, like absolutely. And I think we all have to be thinking about this field in the applications that it can have rather than the technology that it is. And I think it's a problem when these areas start getting hyped, that people start building technologies for technology's sake, and it very much becomes that like hammer looking for a nail rather than you're actually trying to solve some problem with the human condition or disease or whatever. And that's what we just have to now focus on, right? Like which of these technologies are going to have an impact on the human life experience.
And do you suspect, going back into that parallel between neurotech and sort of the psychedelic therapeutic space, in my view, over a period of a few years, all of the like obvious ideas, or the low-hanging fruit, maybe if you want to use that phrase, in like the psychedelic therapeutic space, all the companies that were going after these like obvious or low-hanging fruit ideas got started. But because of the fact that drug development takes a long time, it takes, we still haven't seen the final results of those companies yet. And so I think people are kind of holding off on investing in new, less obvious ideas because they still want to see if like the baseline low-hanging fruit ones work. Do you feel like most of the obvious low-hanging fruit in neurotech has been startupized? Are there companies being built around most of the obvious ideas, or do you think there's still a lot of fertile ground in like pretty obvious high need areas that people could start companies around?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that because of the attention that is now focused on the space, people have really mined academic labs.
It does kind of feel like that, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It does. And I'm inclined to agree with you. I think like we're at a point now where we need to see how those ideas play out and which of them will be successful. Now, I don't want to predict the future, right? I think there will be technological breakthroughs that will come out in, whatever it is, like materials or software designs or chip designs or data, like whatever it is, things will come out and there'll be opportunities there for sure. That said, I think that the rate of learning, especially once you get into human patients and start rolling these technologies out into the world, goes up exponentially. And like there's gonna be a lot of learning that you can feed into next gen technologies over the next 2 to 5 years.
Where do you think most of the innovation comes from? Is it material science, like you talked about? Is it advances in surgical techniques? Is it something else? Or is it just you have to make kind of marginal improvements in all those areas?
I think the engineering innovation that has gone into this space is a huge one. I am personally less excited about breakthroughs in fundamental materials than I am about putting all the parts together to get something into the world. Like a lot of people kind of gave shit to Neuralink in the early days. It's like, oh, well, academics have been doing this for 20 years or 10 years. Like, what is this? And it's like, yeah, some of that is true. Some of that is true. But it gives no credit to the fact that these have to be highly reliable devices and technologies that have to work every single time, right? It can't just break down in a couple of weeks and then go, whoops, like never mind, right? And the reliability that you have to engineer into those things has to be it's like akin to like manned space travel.
It's the
right?
3 nines reliability. If you're
Yeah.
probably more than that, honestly.
And the talent that has gone into some of those companies to make those things work every single time and like change how humans interact with technology or change how diseases are fundamentally managed. I mean, we've got to give a lot of credit to that. And I give more credit to that, I think, than sort of fundamental material breakthroughs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like we probably have enough advanced materials. It's just a matter of that operational excellence and manufacturing excellence and the consistency and the reliability. I see exactly where you're coming from. Do you think when I describe the brain-computer interface space to investors in my fund, for example, one of the things that I'll often say is scientists more or less know how to read from or write to a neuron. The problem is getting to the neurons.
Yeah.
Would you sort of agree with that, or are there other sort of fundamental problems that are equally as difficult? And I guess just to monologue a little bit longer on that, what comes out of that statement is that one of the best dimensions along which to analyze like a BCI company, just the level of invasiveness. Like, are you a headset that is just, zapping, some kind of power in and out, or is it like a surgical implant, or is it something else? Do you think that that's like a good way to, at a high level, look at the space, or are there other dimensions that you think are equally important to analyze the BCI space along?
I mean, I look at the dimensions I look at are what impact are you having on the quality of life of that person, or like what impact can you have with that technology? And quite frankly, like irrelevant to me whether that is implanted or non-implanted or what modality you're using. There's a lot of interest. There's interesting stuff across the range, I think. But like, what are you fundamentally trying to do? What's the impact that you're trying to have that technology? And like, does the way you've designed that device, is that the best way to do that or not, right? And if that's a helmet, perfect. If that's an implant, perfect, right? I happen to feel that there are a lot of human factors and technological reasons that implants are superior in a lot of disease areas. But that said, I don't just like rule out all non-invasive technologies and say like, well, they're useless, because clearly that's not the case, and clearly there's going to be like profound use cases for those technologies as well. A metric that I'm hot on, I suppose, is how long can you be effective for? So you mentioned there, we know how to read from a neuron, we know how to write to a neuron, but how do you get to it? I agree with that statement, but I would say, how do we get to it, and how long can we read and write to that neuron for, right? Is it a single point in time, or are you doing it for 10 years?
And is that a question of just the materials reliability, or is it a question of the neuron over time starts being a different type of neuron, like responsible for different parts of, the neural computation that happens in the brain?
Yeah, I think probably both, right?
Yeah.
Like devices, can, if engineered incorrectly, fail over time. They can break down over time, but also, the body is super resilient and defensive for things being prodded into it. And we'll start to, reject, rewire, change how it works to make sure that doesn't happen. And we have to play whack-a-mole, make sure that doesn't happen.
It's true. You mentioned earlier that you're sort of not anti-drug, but you noticed that people do not have high adherence to their drugs, and so that's kind of probably one of many reasons why you got attracted to devices. But one of the benefits of drugs is that even though there may be drug-drug interactions, you can generally stack therapeutics on top of each other, right? It's not uncommon to see people taking 3, 4, 5 drugs. Do we end up getting to a place where people have 3, 4, 5 different neural implants for different indications? Because this is one of maybe the limitations of implants. Like, I don't know how many times people are going to go into that for different types of devices, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I totally agree with you. Like, I think the synergies between drugs and devices can be really powerful, and it's how we think about our technologies working with new chemo drugs, new whatever else, immunotherapy, CAR T, whatever else comes over the horizon. We think that is like an incredibly powerful combination and stack. But you're right. I think multiple device platforms are inherently incompatible for multiple reasons. Like, if you've got a device in the brain and then you start, an electronic device in the brain, and you start throwing ultrasound at it, like, that device is going to do some wacky stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have to be cognizant of that, and again, the greatest need for the person or the patient at the time. So that has to be that's going to be a hard navigation for multiple companies and also clinicians to figure out, okay, what is the most important thing for this patient? Which device shall I use for their particular ailment, disorder, lifestyle, whatever else it is.
And when you just to kind of continue on this contrast of drugs versus devices, from a product development and business perspective, I don't think there's a lot of clarity for the average person around, like, what is the actual process of getting a device approved, specifically an implantable device, versus getting a drug approved. I mean, with drugs, you've got the phase 1 safety trial, then the phase 2 efficacy, then the phase 3 even bigger efficacy, and then it can be approved. Is it similar in devices? Is it different? In which way is it different?
It's funny. It depends who you speak with. If you speak to device people, if device people are speaking to people that are developing drugs, they're like, "Oh man, I would never develop drugs. That sounds hard." And then the drug people are like, "Oh, I would never touch devices. That sounds hard." I mean, it's a very different pathway, right? And a lot of that, I think, comes down to patient variability. So your body's going to respond very differently to a drug as my body would respond to that drug, or as our friend down the street would respond to that drug, or our friend on the opposite side of the world is going to respond to that drug.
And that could be for a million reasons, even things as basic as, like, the way your liver enzymes function in terms of metabolizing that drug might make a totally different, metabolite of the drug before it even crosses the blood-brain barrier and gets to where it needs to go, right?
Absolutely.
So, like, there's a million things, yeah.
But in devices, I mean, it depends on the device, of course. But in devices, we have less of that patient-to-patient variability, right? So, like, you and me get implanted by it with a BCI, it's going to work pretty much the same way, right? Our brains are going to be acting slightly differently, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But basically, the device will function appropriately and will do the thing that it needs to do. And so those trials are then designed quite differently, right? And they're very focused on the safety of the patient. They're very hardwired for safety of that individual patient and making sure that they don't have adverse events responding to that device implantation. The thing that typically means that the trials are a little bit smaller. So it's not unusual to see 20 to 50 patients in an early feasibility study and like a couple of hundred in a pivotal study, right? Which to a drug company, that would be just completely insane that you'd run these trials this small. But device companies do this pretty routinely, and you can get the data that you need to get from a cohort like that.
And that part of that is because there's less variability, as you said, and so you don't need to have as big of a sample size, I guess. And then in drugs, generally what happens is that you'll have the phase 1 safety study where you give the drug to healthy people, not people that are suffering from the disease that you're trying to cure. Is the same thing the case in devices? Or
no, typically not.
Right.
Typically not. You'll start with sick patients. And a lot of that really, let's again use this sort of implantable neurotech case. A lot of that comes down to the permanence of it. So, I go into a drug trial and I take a drug and my metabolism kicks in, and then, a couple of days later or a week later, like, the drug's out of my system.
Right. No healthy person's going to get a brain implant for brain cancer if they don't have brain cancer.
Exactly, right? The risks massively outweigh the financial benefit that you would get from entering that study. And so, no, you start with the sick people. You start with very sick people, usually people with the most serious forms of, in our case, brain cancers or other forms of neurological disease. And then you move on to, more
So
narrow
right off
criteria.
the bat, like whereas with drugs, the first trial, you don't even really get any efficacy data for the most part. And the device side, you do.
You
That
can.
first
You
trial, you
can.
probably are, I'm sure
Yeah.
you're collecting both safety and efficacy data
Yeah.
if you're putting it in sick people, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So is it also therefore correct to assume that using the drug analogy, usually the big value inflection point is once you've shown some efficacy? And
sure.
so does that mean that, like, at least on average, a device company is going to have a value inflection much earlier than a drug company might? Or
They can.
they could.
They
I
can.
guess, yes. Okay. Not making any promises to shareholders of Coherence, but just speaking in generalities.
Yeah, they can, right?
Okay.
You can run that depending on the severity of the diseases and depending on the type of device. Like you can run those studies, very quickly and very efficiently as you want to. For us, like we're looking at getting in patients really soon. We'll be doing our first in human this year, and then we'll be targeting our first clinical study, chronically left devices, a couple of years after that. So end of 26, early 27 is when we'll be looking for those first devices that are left in patients going home. And that is pretty rapid, in sort of healthcare development timescales.
Yeah, so you started the company in 2022, and you're basically saying in 5 years you're going to be having an efficacy trial.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a drug company that's starting off with designing a new molecule, you're talking much longer than that before you get to an efficacy study. So yeah, that's quite interesting. And what was so you said 2027 is when you're going to have the chronically left in study. Before that, you have some more acute where you put it in, experiment a little bit, and then take it out?
Yep. So this year we'll be running, in September, October this year, we'll be running our first in human studies where we're looking at impermanent devices. So devices that are implanted during surgery. We'll be doing some surgical mapping. We'll be delivering electrical stimuluses and looking at safety of that electrical stimulus as well, which we've already done in large mammals, of course. And then we'll move pretty swiftly from there into our chronic studies.
Amazing. What this is the first startup that you have done, correct? Unless maybe you have had a secret startup that I didn't know about.
No
I don't
secret
know.
startups. This
What is your opinion on being the CEO of a startup versus the academic stuff that you did, or even the roles at like the medical device companies that you had? I imagine that you're a lot more scattered as the CEO. Generally, I oftentimes feel very scattered as sort of the CEO of the fund that I run, which is hard when you're a person like me, and I assume you, who's like very interested in like sitting down and focusing very deeply on something for a long period of time. It's very difficult to do that when you're in like a leadership position. So how do you feel about that transition?
Yeah, I moved from academia into a startup because I feel like a company is the way you can have the largest patient impact the quickest.
Well, there's no debating that for sure.
And that was my primary motivation. The idea of being able to work with incredibly talented individuals on a sort of a focused problem, where everyone is aligned with like the mission of what you're trying to do, was incredibly attractive, and like that's what motivated me. Is it challenging? It's incredibly challenging, right? Spinning all the plates at the same time, especially as an early stage startup. I've heard this saying before. They say, VCs are sort of like capital allocators of their LPs, right? They're like brokers of capital, right? You have to make the bets. Sometimes I feel like that as well, right? So I've received some capital from you, and I'm now a capital allocator myself. I have to decide, which engineers get that cash and what they invest that cash into, and how we can make sure that we have the highest inflections and move quickest to market. And that is, in a sense, like, setting the strategy of the company. And like, that's how I consider, 90% of my job. It's
Fair enough.
sure we make the right decisions.
That really is what it is. I mean, it's kind of capital allocators all the way down.
Yeah, it's capital allocators. And my engineers have to decide which trials they want to run,
right.
which pieces of equipment they want to run. It's capital allocators.
It really
all the way
is
down.
capital allocators all the way down. Now, so you transitioned directly from the PhD into the startup role.
Yep.
Where you were, at least at the university that you were at, was there a lot of like, I don't know, were there many forces pushing PhD students to starting companies, or were you sort of an anomaly in that you were starting a company after your PhD?
I think so. I was based in Cambridge. I think in Cambridge, there is now quite a lot of excitement, let's say. I wouldn't call it pressure, but like excitement around moving your ideas into companies. That's definitely true.
That's good.
It's really good. It's definitely been a movement that I think some of the academics, are now only seeing. 20 years ago, I think it was 30 years ago, it was kind of suicide for their careers. Now it's pretty encouraged. Cambridge, London, Oxford, it's like very encouraged to do this. And the universities are getting a lot more comfortable with, managing this process from academic breakthrough to commercial rollout and company build out. So, the ecosystem is super supportive in Cambridge. It's not as mature as San Francisco, and this is why we're also here, because we need that maturity of scene and system behind us as well. But there's some great people doing some cool things in the UK as well.
What is a piece of advice you would give to someone coming up at the end of their PhD that's considering maybe doing a startup?
You've already got a pretty high pain threshold off the back of your PhD, which is like very good. People are like, "Oh, are you working all the time now?" It's like, yeah, but like we were already working all the time. Like we were already working 7 days a week,
right.
And now
and we were also making no money,
and we were also making no money,
yeah.
And we continue to make no money. Advice, I would say the biggest piece of advice I usually give people is people are very sensitive around their ideas, and I just think it's just the wrong approach. I think you just need to speak to more people about what you're building, be super public about what you're building, because it's age-old, tired advice, but it's just like everything is in the execution, right? Sure, capture your IP, but like you're gonna have to execute faster than everybody else. You're gonna have to build faster than everyone else, and you sharing and getting some feedback on your idea. If they can build that faster than you, then you're probably not the right person to be doing it anyway.
Fair enough. So do not give in to the instinct that says, well, I don't know if I should tell too many people about this. What if they steal my idea?
Yeah,
do I need to make this guy sign an NDA? Blah, blah, blah. All that. Yeah.
And it's like, get on with it. Like get your feedback, get people excited. And like most people are tied up with their own ideas, their own stuff, right? They don't want to take your ideas. They want to build their thing. They want to help you build your thing. And my experience is like the people who, are working in adjacent fields have only been like, hell, let's do this. Like, how can we help you? How can we introduce you to investors? How can we like make this happen? This is a cool idea.
They're usually not, like you said, they're too busy with their own shit to steal your idea and start copying it. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. Are there any things that you wanted to talk about that we missed, or any takeaways that you want to leave people with?
I mean, just that I think the application of BCIs and neurotechnology in diseases, cancer is of course something that we're super excited about, the potential to revolutionize cancer treatment. The application of this in disease management bidirectionally, I think it's just going to be huge, right? Not just modification of disease, but this, for the first time in human history, multiple diseases, we're going to have real time, high spatial resolution, high temporal resolution data. We've never had this. We've never had this in like the history of healthcare and disease management. I'm incredibly bullish on this over the coming years. Like, I think it's going to change not just how we as a company treat these patients, but as how everybody else treats these patients as well. It's going to be a compounding effect, and I think that's going to be huge. And we're really excited to be part of that in oncology.
I love it, man. What's the website for people that want to follow you?
The website is coherenceneuro.com.
Coherenceneuro.com. Yeah. And I'm sure you're on LinkedIn, Ben Woodington, if people want to reach out to you.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Proud to be a backer of you guys through our fund. And, we'll come back and do another podcast after the IPO. Okay?
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to chat. And then I'll be feeding back into your fund.
Thank you. Awesome, man. That was great.